I still believe in authenticity. I still believe that the human teacher has sort of authentic qualities of empathy and values and judgment that ChatGPT doesn't, because the AI, it's like every month it's developing further. There's more and more YouTube videos and articles on the internet debating the possibilities and the limitations of AI, and they vary from the most dramatic predictions of everybody's going to be out of work to it's probably not such a big deal, or it's going to collapse because it's just a great big bubble. So I want to start today with a book that I found, written by two Frenchmen, actually, including Laurent Alexandre. And he very dramatically says in his book, we needn't bother going to university anymore. He states that, diagnosis by ChatGPT is 4 times more accurate than diagnosis by well-trained doctors. So why waste time, 10 years in France, getting a medical degree? Now, of course, with AI, with ChatGPT, I can do some research and find out if, in fact, there is evidence that diagnosis by ChatGPT is 4 times more accurate. And it seems that may be a little bit of a hype. So one of the aspects of the world we live in today is that we are inundated with hype, with outright falsehoods, with exaggerations, because in today's sort of information and media environment, people who want to attract attention are rewarded by being dramatic, controversial, inaccurate. All of these things seem to be, in today's world, good. So how does all of this relate back to language learning? So as I was following these different threads in YouTube, I came across a discussion on the limits of large language models. Now, bear in mind, I'm not an expert on by any means. I have just the most superficial knowledge of AI, but it seems that what we are dealing with now with ChatGPT and other similar AI systems is large language models. And to that extent, it has some relationship to language learning, which I'm going to get into. And so that lots of information is pumped into these language models, and some guidance, some instruction, and some training. And based on that, these models develop some ability to predict the next word, as they say, the next token, to anticipate what's coming. And I have likened that to language learning, where by ingesting so much input of a language, we develop the ability not to predict what's coming. And I've made reference to how the brain predicts. I've called language learning as a probabilistic, error-driven process, whereby the brain gets used to getting a better and better sense of the patterns of the language. And so to that extent, it's similar to AI. But along the lines of what my research was a discussion between Richard Sutton, who is a very famous scientist in the field of AI. He's at the University of Alberta. And he is the father of reinforcement learning. And he had a discussion with a Dwarkesh Patel, who's a very famous podcaster in the AI field. And he points out that the limits to these large language models is that they don't have a goal, they don't have values, they can only project forward based on all of the information and the guidance that the system has received. And I find that in language learning, there is a bit of a parallel. In other words, if we rely on instruction, on rules, then we aren't going to do as well as if we rely on a massive amount of input. And Richard Sutton says we need to rely on this massive amount of input, whereby slowly, rather than trying to instruct the AI will develop an ability to be more and more accurate in predicting what's going to happen. But it still doesn't have values. It still doesn't have judgment. It still doesn't have that trial and error that humans have in their own intelligence and in their own education. And I believe that when it comes to language learning as well, the sort of instruction can only take us so far. We have to expose ourselves to trial and error. We listen, we don't understand, we listen again, we make some assumptions of what's coming, or we try to speak and we get it wrong. And in this way, we gradually improve. And in that regard, I saw again on the internet a description of sort of the qualities required of a teacher. And I think if we go back to the original interview with this Frenchman, Laurent Alexandre, and you can look these up, by the way, I encourage you to start. It's so easy nowadays to either ask ChatGPT or go to YouTube, ask a question, put something in there, and you'll learn a lot very, very quickly. And to that extent, the world of AI is enabling us to learn much faster than we could if we took the bus to the university and sat in the classroom. So that is true. I doubt that the AI is going to get rid of universities, but if done properly, it empowers the teacher, it empowers the professor, it empowers the learner. And I think that's the way we need to look at AI. How can we use it to be more efficient as learners, more efficient as teachers? Traditionally, the teacher is seen as someone who explains the language, explains the rules, structures the class. And I think all of these things are no longer relevant. The teacher, as well as the learner, has to develop a broader base of those kinds of skills and those attributes that AI does not provide. It's pointless to give the learner in a language class rules about how the language works, because the learner can find that in him or herself easily through AI, through even searching on the internet. For example, Dr. Maurice Rabotin, who influenced me when I was at McGill, developed in me an interest in French. He was able to inspire me with his intellect, with his interest in the way he presented French civilization. Those are the kinds of things that the teacher has to provide, to stimulate, to encourage, to guide, to support. Those human attributes that ChatGPT doesn't have. Although there's some discussion that ChatGPT can engage with someone and can fool people into thinking that ChatGPT is your friend and so forth and so on. I still believe in authenticity. I still believe that the human teacher has sort of authentic qualities of empathy and values and judgment that ChatGPT doesn't, because the AI is just projecting forward based on all this information that's been fed to the AI bot. But you may correct me if you want. So, and as learners as well, I think we are going to have to focus less on learning the nuts and bolts, which are in any case difficult to refer to, and we're going to have to improve our overall knowledge base. We're going to have to improve our, again, critical thinking. But critical thinking is not something you can teach someone based on some rules. The critical thinking, in my view, and I've always felt this, is based on how deep and how, wide is our knowledge of the subject matter. How much general knowledge do we have? How much have we read? How much have we forced our brains to think of different scenarios in different fields? It's that general knowledge which gives us qualities that the AI bot doesn't have. And I think education has to be more focused on those kinds of things, which in the case of language learning means trying to find some aspect of a language that is of interest to the learner, try to stimulate their curiosity, find a language they're interested in, find some aspect of the language they're interested in. All of that, which is difficult to do, is more important than teaching the rules of the language, which are available anywhere. And so from that perspective, the teacher should be less concerned about testing the learner and what the learner knows, and in fact should be more concerned about tracking how active the learner is. If the learner is active, if the learner is engaging with the language, I've said this many times before, the learner will eventually learn. Some may learn faster, or some will learn some aspects better than other. But if you can motivate the learner and then you can ensure that the learner stays active, you will achieve your goal. And this is the other thing that Richard Sutton brings up. We need to have a goal. So I was thinking about my own language learning, and I realized that I am a bit at a dead end when it comes to, say, Arabic or Korean or some of these languages, because there's no immediate goal. So when I was planning to go to Turkey or planning to go to the Czech Republic or Ukraine or whatever, when I lived in Japan, I had a reason, I had a goal. Richard Sutton, again, points out that the large language model doesn't have a goal. You have to have a goal. It's not enough to simply be, in the case of my Arabic learning, ingesting all of this language, but I don't really have a goal. The reason, maybe one of the reasons why I have done better in Persian is there are a lot of Persian speakers here in North Vancouver in particular, so there's an opportunity to use it. Also the fact that I had a teacher tutor online at Link who prepared so many interesting materials about, the history of Iran and so forth and so on. So there has to be a goal, something beyond just mechanically trying to master the rules. That's not going to get you there. So to that extent, again, I see a sort of a parallel between AI, building up these AI models, and what we do as learners in learning a language. But it seems more and more there are articles on the internet pointing out the limitations, why we won't achieve sort of that next level of AI. There are inherent problems with the current large language model of AI that will prevent that from happening. But that doesn't prevent, or it doesn't prevent people who are confident, who are so confident of what they're doing that they're overstating what can be achieved with it. And this tends to happen. People who basically are glib and good at explaining and get caught up in their enthusiasm. Maybe I'm guilty of the same. They sometimes oversell what those things can achieve. And so getting back to, again, Richard Sutton and the importance of values, humility is an important value. Honesty is an important value. And those are real human values. The AI model doesn't have humility or doesn't have honesty or is not concerned about any of those things. It's just regurgitating, as far as I can tell, information based on information it has consumed. So we as humans have to decide what are the important values to us. But the whole thing is changing very quickly. And so every month there's new developments and there's massive amounts of money being spent on these data centers. And as these data centers are massive consumers of energy, if the United States, for example, is going to substitute and try to repatriate aluminum smelting, they won't have the electricity or the grid capacity to do that, because every month there's more and more investment in these energy-intensive data centers, so that the development of AI and the commitment being made to AI has tremendous ramifications across our economies, not to mention the ramification if it turns out that it's a big bubble and we don't need those data centers. But I won't venture there because I don't know enough to comment. But I guess really what I wanted to say was there's so many ways we can use AI. For example, I'm interested in the subject of AI. I find YouTube videos on AI. I can take the URL, as I've said before, and I can go to Notebook LM and I can make that into a Ukrainian language or Arabic language or Persian language dialogue, podcast. And so I'm following my curiosity about AI. And as I mentioned previously, once we sort of arouse our curiosity, we become better at remembering not only what was the specific target of our curiosity, but also other things. We become more efficient at remembering. So in that way, I'm using AI. You can search, find your own material. I think nowadays it's so easy for people to find links to YouTube videos or to articles that are, or podcasts that are relevant to their interests in whatever language they want. And if it's in some language other than their target language that they're trying to learn, they can then convert it into material in their target language. The sky's the limit. I will leave you some links, however, just to kind of guide you along. But I would encourage you to do your own research in AI, which in French is IA, or in German it's KI. And you can search these different versions of artificial intelligence in different languages and scour the internet for material where you can learn about AI and use AI to improve your language learning. And I say that as advice both to learners and to language teachers. So, bit of a random rant here with me basically regurgitating some of the things that I've found, perhaps without too much order or system. But nevertheless, I look forward to your comments and reactions. Thank you for listening. Bye.